Thanks for listening to Audiobook Select. Today we're reading Woods Runner by Gary Paulsen. Chapter 10. This time the sounds of men coughing and axes chopping wood for the fire awakened Samuel. He opened his eyes. The pain was much less, and he saw that it was daybreak. Men were moving all around him. He started to roll, but the head pain stopped him, as well as the sudden memory that he had no pants on. The bedroll was next to him where Coop had put it. He snaked his pants out, pulled them on, and fastened them with the leather cord around his waist. The pain in his head had abated. It only jabbed if he moved suddenly. The wound felt tight, as if someone were pulling the top of his scalp together. When he unrolled the blanket, his rifle half fell out, and he saw that his lock had dirt jammed, frozen around the flint or pan, pushing the striker plate frozen so the rifle was not able to fire. The men were making fire, trying bedrolls. One man had looked to be a permanently bent left arm held up at one slight angle. He was sitting on the ground cleaning his rifle. It made Samuel feel embarrassed that his own lock was so dirty. He found his possibilities bag in the blanket roll. This was a pouch with a powder horn attached to his hung around his neck, where he carried odds and ends of equipment for cleaning and firing his rifle. Inside he had a tiny piece of steel wire. After blowing the dirt out of the pan and frizzen and flint, he used the wire to clear the touch hole, which fled the jet of flame from the pan into the powder charge. Then he used an oily rag to clean the whole area and put some finely ground black powder into the pan. This was the ignition powder that the flint metal sparks would fire into the powder charge. He closed the frizzen over the pan, eased the hammer to half cock, safety, and the rifle set aside. The fire had flared up as the men added wood. Samuel rose to his feet and went into the nearby bushes to relieve himself. His legs were wobbly but seemed to work well enough. Even though he felt as weak as a kitten, as one part of his body got better, another would follow. As the pain in his head went down, the hunger in his belly came up. There was the entire back leg of an ox over the fire on a metal split. Last night, Coop had been cutting bits of it to put in Samuel's broth. Looking at it made Samuel even more ravenous. But the other men who weren't eating, so he held back. One thin man with scraggly beard saw Samuel looking at the meat. He pulled a knife, really short sword, carved off a generous piece, and handed it to Samuel. You gotta eat. We might walk all day today, and it's going to be hard for you if you keep up without your belly is full. Thank you. Samuel took the meat. It was very tough, and he sat chewing and swallowing, watching men clear up the camp. Samuel watched the men and ate. He also rolled and tied up his bedroll, making certain his powder was dry and his possibilities bag was ready to go. But these men were even faster. Without speaking, except to grunt and point, they seemed to get everything done with at least effort and in the quickest time. The ox was yoked and tied off to a tree. The skid that Samuel had been on, which had two long tongues that went up either side of the ox and attached to the yoke, was hooked up and packed with extra equipment: the cooking pots, blankets, muskets, a small keg of powder and another of whiskey, and of all things, a drum left by the fleeing redcoats and Indians. Then the men came by and stood by the fire. In silence, they cut pieces of meat and ate, drinking creek water out of a wooden bucket with a wooden dipper. Samuel still had dozens of questions, but since the men were silent as they stood staring into the fire while they chewed, he held his tongue. There were several men. When everybody was done eating, they took a plug of tobacco and poked it in their cheek or lower jaw. They put the leftover meat on the skin, wrapped it in a piece of green ox hide to keep the flies off, and then used the bucket to fetch the water from the creek to put the fire out. With no effort at all, they were moving along the trail. Two men went well ahead, one left, one right of the trail. The rest just formed a column. If 5 men could be called a column, just ahead of the ox and Samuel. In Samuel's weakened condition, there was absolutely no way he could have kept up with the men, but the ox saved him. He knew that the oxen tend to plod a little less than 2 miles an hour, and this ox was slower yet. Even Samuel had no trouble keeping up with him, and when his legs felt a little weak, he would move to the ox's side and hold on to the yoke, letting the ox pull him along for a time. Every hour and a half or two, the men walking ahead would come in and 2 others would move out. On one of these cycles, Coop came back and walked near Samuel. It was what Samuel had been waiting for. "You kept me alive. Thank you." "It weren't much. A little tobacco and spit and thaw meat. I'd been done if you hadn't come along." "Maybe, maybe not. One never knows how wind is going to blow. Why did you come along? Where are you going?" Coop spit, the men all spit. Almost all the time Samuel had once tried tobacco, first in a clay pipe, then taking a chew, and then he had made it a stick as a dog. He couldn't see the sense in using it, but all these men seemed to chew all the time, and spit like fountains. Maybe something happened to your taster when you got older, but he thought, so you didn't mind it. "We are going to join up," Cooper said, pointing east with his chin, "and fight them redcoats. There a feller named Morgan round about Boston City startin' up Morgan's rifles. We all shoot rifles, and we figure to give them redcoats a taste of good shooting. They got nothing but muskets, good for nothing after 50 yards. Carl here," he pointed up to where his brother walked beside the head of the ox. "He can pink a man on a horse out to 200 or 300 yards every time, wouldn't even know what hit him, nor where it came from." He nodded his chin at the group. "Every man here can hit a yards. I s'pose you could too. Take a mind to it. I'm not sure about killing. You did that Indian back there, lying dead and had a bullet hole in him. I wasn't aiming. He shot and I pulled the trigger. What you gonna do when you find your mam and pap? Shake hands with them that took 'em?" Samuel felt like spitting too. "I haven't thought that far yet." "Best be thinking on it, and keep your powder dry and your pan primed." "Right. Thing is, I didn't even know there was anybody to fight. Who was good or bad, which side to be on." Coop snorted. "Don't take much thinkin'. Them that starts in killing people for no reason. Them that comes and takes your folks with a rope around their necks. They's the bad ones. You good people don't do that." "What reason?" Samuel stumbled on a rock. To his surprise, the ox was aware of it and hesitated to let him catch up. "Why those British redcoats and Indians attack us like that? There was no reason. We weren't against the crown or rebels or anything." Coop spit, neatly taking a fly off the ox's ear. He snorted. "Redcoats doin' it because they's redcoats and ain't worked a tinker's dam, follerin' orders. Indians doin' it because they're hired to do it. They's Iroquois. Most of 'em work for the English. Have, always will. Ever since the French war they've got plunder they can carry and scalp money for the redcoats. Heard there's a man named Hamlin some kind of redcoat officer. By so many scalps they call him Hairbryan Hamlin. What I don't understand is why they took your folks instead of killing. Oh look, the front line is coming in. The column stopped by Clearwater Creek, and everybody drank. The men took the meat off the drag and sat in a circle, cutting pieces and chewing. At first Samuel hung back, but Carl motioned him to squat and eat. Samuel was feeling stronger by the minute, and the meat heated him to light the fire. No one talked much except for Coop, and when they finished they rose and chewed of tobacco and set off. Coop and another man went ahead. Samuel walked in silence, hanging on to the wooden shaft tied to the ox. It was mid-morning, and sun fell through the trees on the other side of the trail, so they seemed to be walking in a lightened green tunnel. Now and then insects catch sunlight and flashed white like small lamps. Any other time Samuel would have been taken by the beauty of it. But now he could not stop thinking of what Coop had started to say. Why hadn't the raiders killed his parents, and why wouldn't they do it now? I'm dragging behind them, he thought. 6, maybe 7 days. Dragging along with an ox. God only knows what's happening to them. I have to go faster. The Hessians. The British, also mercenary soldiers, is issued with the same brown bess musket, and many called Hessians. While they were relatively effectively at combat soldiers, they brought them with much savage, such atrocious behavior, and committed war crimes so far outside civilized behavior, bayoneting unarmed, captive soldiers who had surrendered, farmers, women, including pregnant women, children, and even infants, that they became known as little more than beasts, and were treated in kind. That was Chapter 10 of Running Woods Runner by Gary Paulsen. To read the rest of this book, go to our YouTube channel and go to the playlists and click on Woods Runner by Gary Paulsen.